Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, one more time.
I like it when Matthew freezes and it's not my internet.
Yeah, that's good.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, a lot of times we sit and talk about what did the author mean? Why did the author have this happen? How do you pronounce the weird science fiction words that the author wrote? Today, we have the author with us. Pete Wright, well-known podcaster, one of the founders of the True Story FM family of podcasts, a person who podcasts about Marvel, about ADHD, about 8 million other things. He has written a number of books. His first one that came out was called Lattice, a science fiction novella. And we have him here along with my co-host, Paul Christopher Hoppy, to talk about that book. Pete, how are we doing today?
We're doing all right, Matthew. I'm thrilled to be here. Little nervous.
It's I think it's gonna be a fun conversation. And I'm gonna start with a really hard-hitting question. Ferrominum?
Ferrominium? Is it ferrominium?
I'll go with ferrominium.
Does it depend if you're British or
or
ferrominium? Yeah, it sounds better when you're British. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Ferrominium.
There's a lot of background to some of these words.
What we know is that it is not as powerful as the human body. And we'll get into more of a discussion about that. We're going to have a spoiler section about the book because mostly this is not a review podcast. This is where we like to talk about science fiction issues, ethics questions, all that stuff. And this book raises some great ones on everything from, father-son dynamics and family dynamics to larger issues of space travel and science fiction to basic questions of criminal justice and politics and capitalism and business and how they all interact, stuff that has a lot of relevance for our own world, like most good science fiction. We want you to buy the book, obviously. So if you have not read the book yet, please go and read it. You can find it in a number of ways. All those links are going to be in the show notes. Definitely buy a copy. It's pretty cheap. It's a great book. Paul, you think you read it in like 2 hours?
It was 3 hours and 17 minutes. But
okay,
I could have read it faster. Yeah, I don't know. I time things sometimes. But I could have read it faster, but it's very cinematic and I like to really picture what's going on as opposed to just kind of like see what happens. So
yeah. So so if you've not read it, please do, then come back, hit pause, etc. We will have most of this is going to be a spoiler section. But just to kind of whet the appetite a little bit more for the book, we'll talk about it a bit in a non-spoiler section. And Pete, let me just start by asking, this is a novella, which is not a format I think we see very often. I would love to see more of them because it's a really fun read. And I think, as you said, Paul, I mean, it's a cinematic. You get the whole story. Why'd you choose a novella?
Well, it was actually sort of a choice of necessity. I've been writing for many, many years, and I've never published anything. And I guess I need to go back a little bit if it's not too self-indulgent. I ended up getting published for nonfiction and co-wrote a book with my co-host on the ADHD podcast about ADHD. And that was extraordinary. And Wiley Publishing was fantastic. And they were very confident in us and in the book. And they liked my style a lot and said this was great. So I got a lot of like puffery around the writing. And I thought, well, wait a minute, why am I not doing anything with the fiction that I've been writing for years? Yeah. I'm on another podcast called Craft and Chaos with Kyle Olson and Ryan Dalton, who's a YA fiction writer in his own right, and Mandy Fabian. And they dared me to dust off an old project and resuscitate it and bring it to life. That started me down a bit of a rabbit hole and led to Lattice. This original story was a story I wrote in high school for my my senior sort of creative writing thesis project, and it was a delight, and it was full of all of the crazy science fiction words that a high school young man would come up with. And so I spent probably 3 months essentially kind of rewriting it, keeping the stuff that I loved because it was part of my youth, and recognizing that it has all kinds of things that I might have changed if I didn't sort of love that guy who wrote the book originally. And then I thought the novella was a very sweet spot because I also really enjoyed writing this character of Jax, of Perry Jax. And I thought, I'll bet there are other Jack stories that I could tell after this one. And wouldn't it be fun to have a character that I can play with in different locations and talk about larger issues that I'm fascinated in and have clearly been for years, institutional systems that are objectively wrong but are unstoppable because of the systemic momentum. I just love all of those things, and so I figure these sort of short stories, character-driven stories, actually are a good tableau for these kinds of conversations.
That makes a lot of sense in two ways. First, I was going to say it felt like a throwback to older science fiction, and in that, like, and obviously it's always interesting, like the 1950s idea of the 2000, 500 years in the future, they had never thought of iPhones, so they,
Right.
it's like hard to imagine, kind of like how the original Star Treks had monochrome screens because they just couldn't have,
Right.
they don't have the technology for it. But and so when I was reading it, I was kind of wondering, like, were you doing an intentional throwback to the science fiction of our childhoods? No, you just wrote it back.
I wrote science fiction of my childhood. It's actually really funny. Like, there are little things in there, and I'm actually, if spoiler territory writ large, I'm working on the next Jack's book right now, and I'm really intentional about when they use paper. There is still paper on space stations, and that's important to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I like that there is a broken printer under a clerk's desk. That makes me viscerally happy. So, yeah.
Well, and I'm thrilled to hear that there's going to be another Jack's book coming soon, because this felt episodic in a way. And it's obviously a pivotal incident in Jack's life. It felt kind of like, the season 1 finale. But like I can easily see this being, that, like, I love Lawrence Block. I don't know if you read his stuff, but Matthew Scudder is one of my favorite characters, and he's a private detective. And in every book, there's a murder mystery. But mostly he's also a recovering alcoholic. He solves murders as a way to not drink. Most of the book is about him dealing with that while, solving a murder by the end of it.
Yes.
And I love books like that. I love, Paul introduced me to a TV show, but I know it's based on novels about character Sharp Rifles and all those, a character in Napoleonic Wars. And each story, there's some character development, but it's also just the story of the day. And so this feels like, as I said, like kind of a season finale, but an episode. And so I love knowing we're gonna get more of those.
For sure. And when you look at Jax as a character, like, this is a difficult part of his life, and you might imagine that there are next chapters that deal with, why won't the systems that I'm a part of let me grieve? Right? Like, why does the system keep me living in such a raw, unsettled space? And also, I'm going to try and solve a mystery too.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, and I know we also had a couple, I want to mostly talk about those questions in the book itself. We'll get into those in the spoiler section, but Paul and I also talk a lot about the art of writing itself. And so, Paul, I know you had a couple questions you wanted to ask about sort of how this was written.
Yeah, it was, why did you choose to make it a novella? Or, so Matthew just took my main question. And my other question was basically, well, first I just want to just say, I love a novella. My first, well, I did like a flash fiction folio thing. There's a bunch of really short, really weird stories that I probably wouldn't read, but I wrote them. And then the next thing was like a novelette, which is like, it's not quite long enough to be a novel, but or not a novella, but it's too long to be a short story. It's in this kind of like, because that was just kind of what the story asked for, in my opinion. And I think a lot of novels could, like, I would probably enjoy them more if they were novellas. And not to get into actual spoilers, but I did feel like each chapter had a clear purpose in the narrative arc, and it went like da, 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 and there wasn't a lot of stuff that to me felt like a writer saying, oh, I need to stretch this out, right? Or I need to add, what we call filler episodes in TV shows. And so I just wanted to like appreciate the novella form and being able to comfortably read something in one day. I think there's a lot of value to that. It's like sitting down to see a movie that's not like a 4-hour movie where you're like, maybe we'll do half today and take an intermission. And so to me, it felt like the right length for the story, and clearly like there could have been more backstory for like each character and whatever, but it doesn't feel necessary. It doesn't feel like what the story needed. So I just wanted to appreciate both that choice, even if it was born of necessity, and just the format in general, and the fact that now that we read ebooks a lot more than just paperback books, it's easier to like, you can write a story whatever length and you just put it there, and then people can get it, right? As opposed to like the novel, I think is largely built around, well, a book should be about this thick so people can read the title on the spine in a bookstore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
My other question was whether you're more of an outliner or more of a pantser, or like seat of the pantser, basically like how much structure is there ahead of time. Here it sounds like there was like a deconstruction of the structure and then kind of like a
that's exactly how it happened, was figuring out what was the story as I found it, that had been first printed on dot matrix paper.
Yeah. Nice.
Right. On that I had to tear apart. And as I was rewriting it, figuring out like, what is it that this wants to say? Why did I, as a high school student, pick something like deep institutionalized violence as a story that I felt I needed to tell?
Yeah.
And I feel like the world sort of grew into that choice even more adeptly than I feel like I could have expected.
Or wanted, maybe.
Or wanted, for sure. I am usually a pantser. I usually just sit and write, and I'm a huge fan of National Novel Writing Month. May it rest in peace.
Yeah.
That actually helped me. Like this, what you see in the era of Pete right now is a clearing of old creative debts. I've got a number of books that I'm just polishing and publishing, and I'm really excited about doing it. And so, but to your point about pants and plants, I definitely disintegrated Lattice and outlined it and rewrote it. And the next book is meticulously outlined because I now have a vision for an arc. Like, where is this going over not 2 books, but like 6?
Yeah.
When could we package it as a compendium and have a complete reading experience where you can read a whole story in a day and then come back and know that there's another story to come? That appeals to me. That's like, I love those books. For sure. I love collections of longer short stories and things I can invest in, but also know that I can finish and go do the dishes.
Yeah.
Well, especially because this is hard to talk about with spoilers, so I'll leave most of this for the spoiler section. But you wound up creating a world where like a new thing is introduced in this book that obviously is going to be a big part of everyone's life going forward.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be a wonderful way of setting up the scenes and stuff. The questions of like what you wrote in the past, what you wrote today, allows me to ask the one last question that we will before we go into spoilers. And because when I was reading this book, I was like, okay, I see a theme that is clearly influenced by something that happened recently, and I love it, and I love this repeat. And now I'm wondering, did you predict this, or did you let yourself be influenced by it? Because the opening scenes of the book are our hero, who is a private investigator and does other things related to that, including bounty hunting. And so it is space bounty hunting. And I couldn't help but being like, when I first read it without knowing that, I was like, oh, okay, this is one of the things that the kind of fiction we're going to get in a post-Mandalorian universe. I love it. and so I'm wondering, did you have the idea of, I'm sure other people have too, but of like bounty hunting in space long before Mandalorian, or did that show up a little more in the rewrites now, in part with that fellow in the helmet in your mind? Oh my God, he froze.
I'm back. I wanted to make sure you got to the end of your sentence. I think I know where it ended. I'm going to tell you, maybe it was influenced straight up by Empire Strikes Back, right? That's when I was writing this story originally. So fair. You actually asked a question that is more prescient than you know.
Wow.
So
it was someone in a Mandalorian helmet.
It may have been somebody in a Mandalorian helmet, but not that one. Yeah. Which is kind of exciting. I've never actually thought about that. But no, the bones of the story that are in this book are the bones that were written. The character was there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad that we're able to talk about how the bones of the story crystallized for you. Because
Well
that's
played.
probably a
I
good
noticed that.
reason
I think Paul noticed that.
Cheers.
We're with you.
Cheers.
I wasn't trying to hide it at my girlfriend's sister's apartment.
Pun intended.
It's a line early in the book. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to move now into spoiler sections. So if you haven't read it, again, please check the show notes. Pete, I think you have a website that's just like It's Pete Wright, right?
It's me, Pete. It's me, Pete.com.
Great website.
Yep.
Okay.
I've got my books and my writing there. So
yeah, it is. It'll be in the show notes. I'll say also in the show notes if you want to support other authors. Our own Paul Christopher Hoppy has a book out. Zen Madman's Friday Night is My Monday Morning, Volume 1. It's a great collection.
That is brilliant.
It's a mouthful. Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's a freaking brilliant title.
I want to call it FNM to the power of 3, but I was vetoed on that. Yeah. But there we go.
We had to lay some rules.
Both are great. All the ways to purchase them are in the show notes. Please do so. Entering spoiler section in 3, 2, 1. I don't know if Soylent Green is people, but alternative energy is people. For those of you who haven't read the book, but are hopefully are still going to, but just want to hear the discussion, I'm going to give a brief summary of the plot. Pete, of course, jump in with like, no, that's not what actually happened. We basically have 3 stories happening around the same time that all come to intermingle. One story is that there are people on a spaceship who have, they're kind of doing deep mining activities related to the power source in this universe, in this galaxy. And one of them has had their arm turned to crystal through kind of weird exposure to metals and lights and things like that. It's not quite understood. And they're on a ship that it turns out is going to self-destruct. And there's a beautiful scene where the characters all learn that this is going to happen and they kind of face the death together. That was the thing Paul was talking about the first time. We then later go back to that same ship and see the same series of events through a different character's eyes, character who actually is responsible for the destruction of the ship, and we find out why and how he got lied to and all sorts of stuff. So that's one plot line that's happening. A second plot line is the story of Jax, who is kind of living in a kind of hard scrabble life in a hard scrabble space station. This is not a utopia. This is very much a dystopian story, I think we can say, and a beautifully painted one of kind of capitalism in space and poverty. And there's a detail that you keep mentioning that I love, which is on this mining planets, how much dust there is in the air and how that dust freezes at night when it gets so cold and just how much it affects your lungs and everything like that. But this character is in part living this life because he has a very rich father who's estranged from for a number of reasons. And the father has said, son, I need your help. Your brother is on death row, and now they've scheduled his execution. I need you to come back and help me. We eventually learn that the father is kind of more wanting. There's this kind of hostile takeover situation happening through his work, and the brother is caught up in all of that. And then the third is that we see from inside the brother's perspective himself, and the brother was attacked in an alleyway, wound up killing his attacker. What wound up being because no one can find the knife and no one really believes him. And as you said, the criminal justice system is not exactly the most people-focused. Let's find the real truth of things. He's sentenced to murder. He's put on death row. And we see his last days through his eyes as he gets closer and closer to the execution, which turns out to be this, the process that was starting on that ship, what is one that they've now are doing intentionally to death row inmates, where his full body is turned to crystal. Jax gets to the prison too late, which I want to ask him more about when we get there, finds his brother's body and goes back and tries to confront his father, winds up instead confronting the president of the Galactic Council, which I guess is like the I wasn't sure if that was like the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. or the head of the government, and we'll get into that in a bit. But certainly a very important person where he learns that, as I said, it's not Soylent Green, it's people that are the energy source is people. That literally these human
Soylent Blue, right?
Soylent Blue, yes, exactly. That these crystals are able to be the power of ships, and that this is kind of almost a Mad Maxian world in which we've run out of the space travel equivalent of oil, and so most space travel is deeply limited. But with this new energy source that has been discovered of turning literal human bodies into energy sources, that it's the same power of one full cell of phrenomium. I'm sorry, I'm never gonna get it right. But if you don't know how it's pronounced either, I don't feel bad.
It's fine. I'll allow it, whatever you want.
And there's kind of this great confrontation with both that guy and his father, that get into some details I don't know if we need to get into, but yeah, and it kind of ends with his father, him confronting his father about this, him taking some steps against, I think, so let me start again. I'm trying not to exactly spoil the very ending, but doesn't really matter. But yeah, so he has this confrontation first with the Galactic President and his father, and realizes that you said before, these institutional systems are roaming along. He can't do anything. And at the end, his father is basically waiting for death because his father winds up killing the Galactic President, in part to save his other son, in part out of frustration and with all these horrible systems. And Jax ends the book walking away. And here we have a character who we know is going to die, but we don't see his death on screen, and it's not from his perspective. So we broke the chain by the end.
Yep.
Paul gets to be happy. Yeah, so I've obviously just summarized what has been 30 years of your life work into 3 badly phrased minutes. But did I capture the main essence of what you're going for with the story?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the words you stumble on are precisely the words that don't really matter, right? Like, my hope is that people who read this get the sense that all of the funny words are avatars for something else that you can put, like, transparency on top of it. Like, the things I'm most interested in on a character level are, like, when does refusing to abuse power become another form of abandonment, right? Like, this whole relationship with his brother, and I'm an only child. Like, a lot of this is, what would I do if I had a brother, right? What would I do if I had a brother in trouble? Can someone be guilty and still be wronged by a maladaptive system? I'm super into that question.
Right.
So much of this, like, I opened the book with a quote, which seems super pretentious, but Donella Meadows is one of my favorite people. And she wrote this book, Thinking in Systems, that truly impacted me. And the quote is, system structure is the source of system behavior. What we create as humans is how we behave as humans. And the whole point of this story is, look, we created something that is really, if you really put pencil to paper, it doesn't make enough sense to be an economic foundation for space travel. But it sure does to look at how, wrongful incarceration and the death penalty will be used improperly going forward, right? Like, that is the central question to me. What are the systems we put in place that incentivize the wrong thing? And I think Jackson and Leroy and Demetrios, like, they're all, like, just vessels through which to address that bigger question, hopefully in kind of a dark, fun way.
I mean, one of the things we're dealing with right now is that our prison system has figured out that slave labor is useful. And it's quite literally, you can force people in prisons to generate value through their work. And I love that your book kind of turns it on its head, which is saying, what if, because there's a couple times it's mentioned that he's on death row, but in a way of, like, they'll execute him when it's useful to them.
Yes.
And it's what, life with the possibility of death, which is such a twisted sentence. Right? It's like, what is this?
And that's literally what happens, is that they eventually figure out, oh, wait, he is worth more to us dead than he is alive. And you a couple of times you say that, like, he's worth a full year's labor to create this. It was worth 250,000 credits to create the cell that his body can give the equivalent fuel to. And it's so chilling because you say those things in the people who say it are saying it as just their numbers on paper, but it is literally ascribing value to a human being's life in a
and it's a planet's year's labor, right?
Yeah,
it's the labor of an entire planet, not just like a person.
Because look at what this one action is able to unlock in terms of economic value of transport across an entire system, right? There is that question of, like, we'll get your value out of you, and institutionalized labor becomes, we'll get your value out of you whether you're alive and working or not. right?
Yeah.
We have ways now to unlock. Like this is somebody's LinkedIn profile says unlocked value after death, right? Like I came up with the system that you could see somebody being proud of that, and that just makes my stomach churn. So
yeah,
it had to be a part of it.
Well, and I guess that was my first questions was, because one of the questions I'm always, whenever I read science fiction or watch it, like I love it, but I'm always wondering about that technology further. And one of my thoughts was the death penalty side of it. Once we know there's value in a dead human being, we want to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are other stories I've read of a completely different variety where it is not, like Speaker of the Dead by Orson Scott Card, one of the sequels to Ender's Game. And he's an author, obviously, who's done a lot of personal things I have problems with, but I think some of his early books are fantastic. Some of his later ones he puts a lot of his politics into. But Speaker of the Dead, I think, is one of the absolute best. And one of the conceits of it is that they go to an alien planet where when a person dies, when a person is getting very near death, they kill them as part of the, like, we're accepting your death. I think that, I haven't read the book in years, but like the point is that eventually you get a dead body that you plant a tree through, because the idea is that as their body decomposes, it's going to nurture this tree, rebirth, renewal, and all this stuff. But then outsiders look at it and think it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you told me that actually we could take dead bodies and use them to solve the energy crisis and let people choose to do that, I don't know if I'd say that's a bad thing. And the way you set it up is like, in your world, as you would understand it, would people be able to volunteer this at the time of their death? Is it just that it has to be while someone's still kind of young and healthy? Where would that fall?
It's such a
book
good
3,
question.
book 4,
right?
book 5.
But see, you joke and you laugh, but look, that's not how technology from the military-industrial complex infects us, right?
Yeah.
It always starts in a massive system about which we have no control, and then it trickles down to commercialization. So let's just say maybe not yet, but there is, like, when you talk about, and I'll just say it, like it has become a part of the vernacular in subsequent stories where they just call it glassing, right? It's no longer, it's just, just get glassed at the end. So so there is this sort of kind of insistence that the technology is moving down from this horrible thing that we can't stop, and it's becoming a thing everybody uses. Matthew, have you heard of AI?
Once or
right?
twice.
Like, there is this industrial use brought about by ideologically questionable means, and suddenly, when the world gets value out of it, it becomes something we just stop questioning. And that is the system here. Like, I didn't mean it to be that parallel, but I didn't have a choice because we do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's just what we do as complex human organisms. And this is no different. And I hope the extreme is just something that allows the point to be driven home a little bit more clearly.
Very much so. But yeah, I was really thinking in terms of just a running thing about, like, Jack's wondering whether he will use this energy source, and like people around him wondering he's not, and that's being such a great callback. But yeah, I love that you're considering already these questions of how would it start affecting others, and that becomes a whole other series of commentaries and ways, and that, I'm one of the biggest. Paul, I've been running over you. I want to make sure you get in here to ask some things too. But like, I have been one of the biggest proponents there is of allowing people to choose the time and place of their death.
Yeah.
I think you live in the state, I believe, that actually has legalized
very much so
euthanasia and things like that. And as much as I think it's a great thing, I also know that, I don't ever want someone to feel coerced into that. And you hear these stories about perfectly well-meaning situations, but where, like, the family is talking to grandma about it, and in the discussion somewhere, sometimes brought up in really obnoxious ways, sometimes just because grandma knows the truth, is if she chooses to do it now, she saves her family a huge amount of money for the next year. And in the situation like this, I can imagine, like, in the glassing world, it's like, well, grandma, we can hope that this 5% chance of chemotherapy works. or you can be glassed now and send your great grandkids to college.
I think it's even more diabolical than that. Like, you can imagine an entry-level sales guy coming into your house saying, I work for John Q. Mortuary, and one of the options that we have now is this brand new thing. It's called glassing, and it's painless, and you can do it whenever you want. And maybe you should consider doing that now. And the proceeds from your glassing become part of your estate, and JQ Mortuary gets a cut. We now have economically incented the engine of constant death, right? And that is, I think, I just recently had a family member pass away, and the death industrial complex is a real thing, and the salespeople in times of grief are taking advantage in many ways, and they're doing so sotto voce and leaning forward, but it doesn't at all distract from the fact that they are taking advantage, and this becomes a part of that system.
Yeah. Well, so going back to when you wrote this book, you and I did a whole 13-episode podcast on parenthood, where you've mentioned, you and I talked about having, being sons, having issues with our fathers. And so I'm certainly, as everyone knows, teenage boys are the ones who are most likely to have healthy relationships with their parents. So I'm sure that had nothing to do with you writing this at that point. But I'm kind of like, one thing I love talking about is that people use science fiction to get people to think about issues. And I think we've talked about that's clearly a part of what's going on here. If someone had asked you the day you wrote this in high school, all right, so what do you want someone to get out of it? What's kind of your understanding of the things they want to, you want someone to think about differently in their own world after they read your book?
Matthew, that was a long time ago.
That's fair.
I think if I were to put myself in those shoes, I think I would have said, I want my teacher, Colin Chisholm, fantastic writer in his own right. Now he's a coach in Montana or California or something, but he was incredibly influential on me, and I think I thought he was the coolest thing in the world. I wanted to impress Colin. I wanted to write a story that would make him say, "Huh, not bad." Like that's a clever twist of system stuff. I think what I was thinking about at the time, I mean, if you think about sort of when I was doing this in the late 80s, I think it was really clear we were already dealing with some of the symptoms of the maladaptive behaviors of capitalism, right? It was not, things weren't going great in terms of creating systems that masked poor behavior through economic good. And that was a thing that I'm sure I was thinking about. But I've spent so many hours in the words today that it's hard to separate that.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, so let's start talking about Jax himself. And you mentioned an issue that actually wasn't even in my radar screen too much, but I think you're right, is a very interesting part of this. He is a police officer at the time. He's a former police officer for most of the book. We're told that he was a police officer when his brother Leroy went through all this. And as you mentioned, he has the ability to use his police powers to influence things. This is clearly a corrupt system, and his father, who has made his living taking advantage of the loopholes in a corrupt system, asks him to do that. And Jack says no. Talk about that decision and sort of what went into that.
Well, it's a really good question, because I don't think there's a clear, clean answer. It is like as an officer who has taken an oath to uphold the law, being asked to use his power and influence and choosing not to do so is morally defensible on his part, right? But it's also emotionally catastrophic on the other. And it ends up being a choice that he gets to live with well beyond the pages of this story. It is, it's one of those things that now that he's outside the space of sort of law enforcement investigative work, he's now reckoning with, what would I have done differently if I were the guy then that I am today? Because he's a different guy as a result of that one decision. And I'm fascinated with those points in people's lives that you reach and you don't don't know in the moment, but you know shortly after that was foundational. That choice is a foundational memory, and it's going to change who I am. And I wonder if this one was Perry's, right? It clearly has the echoes, but did he know in the moment he made that choice that this was going to be foundational for the future of his career, his life, how he decides, and the methods he uses to help people going forward?
You use incredible imagery all throughout the book. I think it's one of the best parts of your writing. And there's one moment that I think the word is crystallized, which is now such a weird word in this context, but to me really crystallizes that whole thing, both for Jax and for his brother Leroy, which is you talk about that at the moment that the sentence guilty was read out, that Jax starts to lean forward as though he's going to stand up, but stops himself. And that Leroy sees that, and that Jax knows that he sees that. And that was one of my favorite lines in the whole book, because I just thought it so captured how such a small thing, that idea that part of him wanted to, but that he stopped himself, and that Leroy saw him stop himself, that of course that's the exact moment that they would both focus on.
Yeah. When you choose oath to career over oath to family, what does that mean? What does that do to family? What does that do to he just cursed his brother to a future that he is completely out of his control by not using what probably would have been a modicum of influence to change the course of history.
Right.
Can I undefend Jax in this this choice, this early life choice? So if he definitely believed that his brother was committing murder one, and had disposed of the knife because, it would incriminate him and make it look premeditated or whatever, I can get on board with the not institutional loyalty for a second. Because, everything that you're saying about systems earlier, that's why I never want to be part of a system. That's why I'm don't call me a co-host. I'm okay, fine, you can call me a co-host now. But I'm very much Batman in the Justice League animated series, I'm only a part-timer, remember? But that not the institutional loyalty, which is maybe what happened, but the loyalty to one's own conscience and the thought this is what I think I should do. I have this power and I think this would be misusing that power, so I'm not going to do it. And that's what I think is defensible. But if he believes his brother's story, then what's happening in the courtroom is a miscarriage of justice, and it seems like not intervening and not trying to use his modicum of influence to change the course of events is being complicit in a miscarriage of justice in a way. And so to me, that, this being superhero ethics, I thought I just kind of just throw
of course. And I love that. I love that you do that, because obviously that's what happened, right? He chose not to act when all of the emotional forces around him, his family, his sort of the psychosocial forces around him, were begging him to act, and he chose not to act. In that moment, now he has to live with that choice, and what did that do to him and his willingness to act in the future, right? That's the
clearly
point.
He's different now.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But in that moment, he was doing what he believed fervently was the right thing, or at least was being tested, and chose to pass the test this way.
Yeah.
And it was a test that you couldn't actually pass, or any way you pass it, you're still cursed. It's the Kobayashi Maru test. Yeah, right.
Well, and I love Copenhagen and Kobayashi Maru as the two references you go to. But
right.
Paul, I love that you brought that up, because to me, it literally is the Batman choice. To me, the Batman choice is always about it. It's not that Bruce Wayne thinks that I am the only person who can do justice normally, but that that it's okay for him to break the rules of this corrupt system, because the system's corrupt. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Right.
And to me, this feels like, we're so used to the Batman origin story. This is the Harvey Dent origin story. This is the the character who is going to keep trying to say, and I love the fact that as a result, by breaking the oath to the family then breaks his oath to the police. The family basically gets him thrown out of the police, and he's left with nothing. And I agree. I don't think it is a defense. I think I can understand it, especially given his relationship with his father.
Yeah.
Of like, by watching someone abuse the loopholes and basically cause the loopholes that he can't bring himself to do it. But yeah, I think he's wrong. And I love that he's now, he's now dealing with that, obviously, in all these different ways.
Yeah. And
Well,
it's interesting. No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's interesting to think that like maybe his choice would have been different if he hadn't seen his father abuse power in this way all the time, and his father's leaning on him, trying to be like, oh, do this for me, do this for your family. Jax kind of doesn't have the opportunity to just think, well, what do I really think I should do in this instance, like as an individual who's not connected to the situation. Like, right. He's maybe pushed on by being pushed on, kind of.
Right.
Yeah, I think that his dad is the other interesting. Sorry, it's like the punchline to that ethical question, right? It's a guy that his role model is a guy whose major ethical failure is that he can tell himself that any choice is justified because it serves some larger end, right? It's family, it's business, it's survival, it's progress, it's whatever it is that meets the end justified the means guy, and he's kind of a caricature of that model. And so when he comes to Jax and says, I need your help, like there's a sense for me that it is a loving outreach. It is a fearful outreach. And yet is love, familial love, still love when it is inseparable from use, right? Like he is using his son to get to as a means to an end again. And that becomes the next question that Perry gets to deal with. Is like, God, I'm still dealing with this.
Yeah.
Well, there was a question I had at the end of the book that I wasn't quite sure I understood, and I think maybe you've actually now helped me understand it. Because one of the things that so part of it is that Perry at some point leaves, in part because he's fed up with his father, but in part because he believes that if he leaves now, he's going to get to the prison in time to see his brother before the execution. They've been told it's 30 days and thus be there in time. When we then go to the prisoner, he does get 30 days, but he's executed before Jax gets there. And I was left kind of wondering, like, what happened? What was the miscommunication? And is part of the idea supposed to be that this was one last time where Jax put too much trust in the system?
Yeah, because they started the clock too early, and all of the pieces that fell into place that should have gotten Jax into the queue to get the job done and to be there for his brother, at least as to bear witness, started way too soon, right? Without telling him, and he trusted that family and system were going to operate in a way that he could rely on, and once again, he was failed by it.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I'll be very curious to see where the books go, because I can see this becoming a very kind of like dark, gumshoe, jaded hero. I think this could also be one hell of a villain origin story for Jack.
Oh no!
I don't know if that's where you go, but like,
oh no!
tear it all down. This is so wrong.
Well, what do you mean villain? That's a hero you just described. What are you talking about?
Right.
I just think story.
There's a punchline to the whole thing, which is like what does ethical action look like when the day is truly not savable? Right. That's interesting to me. And I think that's how ultimately that's kind of how the book ends. The day is not savable. It's very dark, and he flies off into the proverbial sunset. So, it's kind of what are you going to do? Things happen.
Well, and I think that's part of why, and I'm not going to question aesthetic choices here. So Paul, I fully respect what you don't like. I think though, that's why for this book, opening with the point of view of characters who die is so vital to the way the book plays out, because it is uncomfortable. And there's a part of me in my head that's always like, okay, like on some level, I always want to know that the words I'm reading, someone had the chance to write them down. And so you're like, well, if this person died, like, how are we reading this? But fiction, that's the whole point.
It's also third person omniscient, right? It's not first person.
Yeah, it's not first person. Yeah, that's very true too. But I think by hitting us with that, because because it is not a very used convention in fiction, or at least maybe I'm not reading as much as Paul is, but I kept waiting for the miracle save. I did not believe, even when you got to 30 seconds, I was like, Pete, what are you doing? Where, how is someone going to save them in 5 seconds? Oh, okay. Okay. Now I know. So I felt like that was a really effective way of starting with like, this is not waiting for Superman. There is no hero coming to save the day. And I think the ending would have been a lot harder if we hadn't had that, you know?
It is. I want to respect Paul's position and maybe add fuel to his position, because I also recognize, and I don't want to, I'll paraphrase you, Paul, and you tell me when I lie, that one of the things that you dislike in narrative fiction is when you are witnessing people who know they're going to die and then they die.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that would basically be the main thing, especially when they are killed by another deliberately.
Yes.
If they're sick and dying and they know they're dying, that also fits the criteria, but it's a different flavor.
And so I'm going to say I wrote it and I agree with you. Like I find it very disquieting when that happens, and especially so when it becomes a narrative rug pull. Like it is very much a rug pull, because you feel like you're supposed to get to know these characters in chapter 1, and by chapter 2 they're all dead.
Right.
And that becomes like, I normally respond to that poorly, and yet I just felt like that was what I needed to do to set this up when I first wrote this book, and I did not change it. The only thing that was changed from that opening chapter is that chapter 5, which is the switch of perspectives, was chapter 2. So you had 2 chapters watching the entire crew die back to back. What was I thinking, right? Before you even meet the main character.
It's like, I just saw this. Yeah.
And any other convention, chapter 1 would have been a prologue, which would have told you this is outside the main narrative. But because I went back to it in chapter 5, I felt like I had to make it a part of the mainstream.
Right.
So I recognize it. For me, that disquieting part is kind of, I like reading it back on my heels a little bit for when I settle into who the people are that I'm going to follow in chapter 2. So, I made that the Demetrios choice, which was it served an end.
Yeah.
So
that convention that you, I think, summarized pretty accurately, or not, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, thing that happens in narrative fiction. It's something that I just generally don't enjoy, right? But what I do appreciate is that when you make that chapter 1, like, I know what kind of book I'm reading.
For sure.
And this is kind of what Matthew was saying, I think, where it's like, I wasn't expecting Leroy to survive. Like, I was like, yeah, no, he's done, right? This isn't a book where Jax is going to show up and rescue his brother. It's just not that kind of story.
Yeah.
And where in the end, I was like, yeah, he might just get shot in the back by the president or the whatever of the Galactic Council, right? Like that. This is a story where that's on the table. And it reminds me of something Matthew said about Game of Thrones, which is a show that I stopped watching at some point when I was like, wait, I'm not actually enjoying this because it has so much of specifically that kind of thing. And
all the things you hate, right?
all the things. But like in the first episode, the most kind of relatable, heroish kind of character kills somebody who like did something fine, but he thinks he's lying about it, so he murders him, right? And also this brother and sister push a child out of a castle window to his apparent death, and then he's like kind of okay but not totally fine. But like that tells you like this is what kind of story you're in for. And so here I definitely appreciated that. Like at first I was kind of thinking like, okay, one's something, and I was like, oh no, they're pretty sure they're just all gonna die, and then the way it's exactly written, it's like it's a bit like when the Windfall ended. It's like, did it end the countdown? Like probably not, but
all the lights come on. This is a social experiment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite Star Wars movies is Rogue One, where going into it, I just kind of knew. I was like, they're all gonna die. Like that was my premise going into it, and I enjoyed it a lot. And if I'd gone into it not having that expectation, I don't know if I would have felt the same way. But so reading Lattice, you know, the first chapter I was like, oh boy. I'm like, okay, now we got this bounty, this is happening, blah, blah, blah. And then his brother's on death row. I'm like, oh. And then we're reading his chapter. I'm like, I don't think this is going to end well. Like this, oh yeah, no, there it goes. And I think that was the chapter right after the chapter where we experienced the whole crew blowing up again, right?
Yeah.
So also, like, they got to stop putting self-destruct things in ships. I mean,
and they're all over. Why did they do it?
Why did they do
all
it?
over
Why?
The place?
All over. Just everywhere.
I like how I say they. I didn't put it there. I mean,
No,
when they built the ship, they put these
they.
panels everywhere.
Exactly.
Well, I just want to echo, Paul, what you were saying about the death penalty scene, because what I thought was really incredible here, and again, here I want to praise the writing, but it's such an interesting choice, is there wasn't any doubt in my mind that he was going to be killed. Like you said, Paul, I think that was clear, but you still managed to put an awful lot of dramatic tension in, which is, will the brother get there on time? And in my mind, it wasn't that he would get there on time to save him. It's that he would get there in time just to be with him and just to like have some kind of emotional reconnection, you know? And like, I love a good redemption story. You know, Zuko and Katra are my two favorites from Avatar: The Last Airbender and She-Ra. But I don't like cheap redemption. And I always hate when someone is just about to die, but the person they wronged or the person who wronged them gets to their deathbed just in time or finds them at the battle just in time so they can have some heart-to-heart. And I felt like, as disappointed as I was that the brother didn't get there on time, Jackson didn't get there on time, if he had, and he'd said, you know, Leroy, I'm so sorry I didn't fight for you, and Leroy had said it was okay, it would have just been so saccharine. And I just really love that you didn't give us that you let that be the tension, and the end result is Leroy dies never knowing why his brother didn't come and never knowing that his brother moved at all. Maybe it's starting to question not fighting for him to begin. And it's like, it's very bleak, it's very dark, but it felt very real. And I loved that.
I'm fascinated by I'm sort of fascinated by death, right? Just in general. And our experience of death. And I wanted to kind of be with that moment. Like, had he been sort of rescued, even emotionally, right? Then Jax would have sullied the moment of Leroy passing and the moment of experiencing the machine. And that was important to me. On some level, is that he is like, he has his buddy on staff, right, that he's had these moments with, and that was one of my, like, the 30 days chapter where you get this sort of relationship it was really like, I enjoyed being a part of that, like writing that, because you know, because it just was Leroy adapting to this universe where he's probably not going to be saved, and he gets to get to the moment of being put into the machine. And I guess I kind of personally needed that. I needed to bear witness myself to what was in my head.
There was a like therapeutic feeling to it for me, not like personally, but like I felt like I was experiencing kind of what you're describing, like through the writing.
That's a relief.
And through, and through Leroy's experience, his like ultimate acceptance of just like, this is, you know, what is essentially, and then what isn't.
Yeah,
I have someone who we're not very close anymore, drifted away, but someone who's a very close friend of mine when I was in seminary, who decided as kind of a spiritual practice to start visiting an inmate who's on death row, and he's continued that for many, many years. And I want to send this to him because I feel like there is so much this has to say about that whole process, and the whole process of a government deciding that they can decide who gets to live and die, and how you walk through that. And I'm just kind of curious, how did that, especially written as a high schooler, it feels like it's an issue you have so much insight into. Was that an issue that had like connected to your life at all, or just that you were kind of like, I don't know if you've like read a story about it or something? Like, I know the 80s were the time when we started, I guess late 70s, when we started executions again after the Supreme Court had started them. Kind of not we, I know, Paul, America.
It was causing me physical discomfort hearing the word we.
And
I
to me, that's the whole
appreciate
point.
that.
Is I
Thank
feel like
you.
because my tax dollars pay. But anyway,
Sure,
that's
sure.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, talk about kind of how that issue became something you wanted to focus so much on.
Oh, I'm a Stephen King death row kid, right? Like I'm a Green Mile Shawshank kid, and I think those stories, you can't help but thinking about the big the big issues when you read those stories, because Stephen King is so adept at turning those big issues into tiny horrors, and so I directly pay great respect to those stories as the one, and the Green Mile, and like those are the stories that are a Green Mile and Dead Man Walking, and all of those stories that were happening kind of around the time I was thinking about these things are directly inspirational to just the way I think about death row, and how, and just it's sort of grand wrongness to the universe, and so I think the book itself is super interested in how easy it has become for societies to make violence administratively clean, and the more procedural this process is, the easier it is for each participant in the chain of violence to feel like the moral decision wasn't theirs, it happened somewhere else, and the distance from violence that the administrative state has made capital punishment is massively existentially insulting. And so
there's a line by the president who said, "This is an execution; it's manufacturing."
Yeah,
and I thought that's so.
Yeah,
that.
Yeah. Even just the phrase capital punishment, it's it sanitizes.
Yeah.
And even the death penalty, to me, like, undersells, like, it's a government deciding to murder people and claiming that it's doing so in some, greater good, whatever thing. But it's all of the phrases that people commonly use, I think, are very deliberately designed to kind of wash away the horror of it, really. I'm a Ride the Lightning kid. That's my, Metallica, electric
absolutely.
chair. So,
Well, and I think that gets to part of the sort of villainy of the story that I'm so interested in. Like, it's not, I don't want any of the evil doing to feel mustache twirly.
Right.
So like, this is a board meeting, right? All of the bad happened in a procurement meeting, and or a court order, or there's definitely facility upgrades that we get to talk about. I think
widening the hallways so you can push the
the
cargo, the product down the hall more easily.
And that is so much more terrifying to me, right?
The mundanity of
Yeah.
Well, and so let me talk. We're already at an hour, and I think anyone who's heard any of us knew that getting the three of us into a podcast was not going to lead to one of the shorter episodes of Superhero Ethics. But I want to kind of ask about the one more big issue that I thought was important, and let Paul chime in with any last things before we wrap up. We've talked about the father-son and the abuse of power. We've talked about the death penalty and all that. And obviously one of the other issues that you're really commenting on is fuel, and sort of what are the things, that in the world of today, where I thought you were writing, but it was also even in the world of the late 80s, the late 80s was a time when the Mad Max movies were coming out, which are dystopian future movies about a world where we've run out of gasoline. And you said you wrote, so I'm guessing you wrote this before the first Iraq war, which was very clear, sure, it sucks that Iraq invaded a nation, Kuwait, but like, there's a lot of other nations that got invaded. We intervened because there's oil there.
Right.
But even if that happened, like all throughout the 80s, the Iraq-Iran war and what are we going to do, there was all sorts of stuff about how important the Middle East was, because it was the source of this resource that the entire world needed. And as you set it up, kind of, it's more the Mad Max world. Like they have run out of fuel, and the world is, the galaxy is suffering because of that. Talk about kind of how you saw that and what you wanted to say about sort of the things we as a people, the things that everyone except Paul will do to, deal with the lack of fuel in our world.
I admit thinking about the sort of economic reality was second to the humor that I found in a lack of fuel at a galactic sort of universal scale. I just kept imagining like these transport ships running out of gas and how much it sucks to run out of gas in space. I couldn't, like, I thought that was legitimately funny at first. And then, of course, you're absolutely right. Like, it was the 80s. I learned what embargo meant, right? Like, this, to me, back to the Donella quote, like the system that is unlocked through violence is more important. The fact that they now have a way to answer a fuel crisis with autonomy is really important, right? Whatever party is in power, they now have a choice with how to manage their fuel crisis. Yeah. And it doesn't involve anyone else. It doesn't involve invading other planets/countries. It doesn't, they can just do it. And it's amazing, and it's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly efficient. And we don't need to think about how we got it because it's ours. We own it. We discovered it. We don't need to. We can unlock untold economic potential because of a thing we invented. And it was, unfortunately, I watch a lot of Daily Show, and the quotes that they're pulling right now today, like this week, about how, they wouldn't have ever been able to invent the wheel were it not for America, right? Those kinds of things. Like that's exactly the model that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about agency in economic futures. Like, it's ridiculous. We're ridiculous. And the fact that those systems stand so heavily on the shoulders of so many others and then ignored is the crisis.
When it's funny that part of what you say is the autonomy of we don't have to invade anywhere else because we can get all the fuel from our citizens. Yeah. And of course, the first thing that occurs to me is the minute those citizens get mad, you say, all right, let's get it from someone else's citizens. Right, like, I mean, now we are back to conquering someone, so you can give all them the death penalty. And
I will say another parallel that I have to recognize is Cory Doctorow and his latest, not even latest. The guy is so incredibly prolific, but his book Enshittification, documenting what happens to platforms over time as they increase power and agency over their users, and that is that it. I'm thinking about that, right? I'm like saluting that model when thinking about what happens when corporations and corporate governance allows us to take our users and turn them into fuel for economic gain.
Yeah, that's basically how social media platforms function, right?
You are exactly how social media platforms function.
And exactly that is that they give you a system that you never knew you needed before,
right?
And they give it to you relatively cost-free. There's no advertising at first. There's no spam, and they're filtering. Fee. Yeah, and they're doing a pretty good job of filtering out the hate speech and the harassment. And then they just literally upping the price, but also upping the enshittification, the terribleness of more spam bots and more ads and more hate speech and all this stuff. And you're like, but I can't let go of it. I need this product. And 5 years ago, we never heard of it, or 10 years, whatever. And in the same way, it's like today, none of us are like, oh, I need space travel. I need to go to all these planets, except for rich billionaires. I mean, it'd be nice, I think, eventually to get beyond Earth, but like, we don't need it. But the idea that like, you would just get so used to all this interstellar travel or interplanetary travel. And then someone says, okay, well, we know how much you like it. You have to kill people for it.
Yeah.
Well, it's like if you live in Manhattan without a car, you're like, I don't need a car. And then you move somewhere else, you get a car, and you're like, I could never live without a car.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. I rented a car for a weekend in Manhattan, and now suddenly I better look for permanent parking space.
Yeah. I'll just spend an hour a day looking for a spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in Manhattan. I was very proud of the fact that I didn't really get a driver. I got a driver's license when I was 18, barely used it. Had to get one again when I was like 26 because it just never was a thing for me. And then I moved back to New York, and I intentionally found a place where I could get decent parking that was far enough out into Brooklyn because, and now I go back and it's same like I live in a house that has maybe 5 times as much space as the New York apartment where I grew up in.
And plenty of parking.
Yeah, plenty of parking.
You could park several cars in and around your house.
And it's still cheaper than an apartment.
Right.
Sure.
All right. Well, Paul, all right. Well, Paul, I want us to start wrapping up. And what are the last things you want to ask about, either in terms of the story itself, the ethics, the writing?
Oh dear. Let's see. I think I asked my main writing questions. Yeah, I guess in terms of other stories, like you were talking about having this kind of backlog, right, of things that you've worked on over the years. Very relatable, by the way. Do you have a bunch of other stories that are in the pipeline and coming soon? I think there's one that is also available.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Another one.
So this Lattice I released, and I'll, again, not that anybody's interested, but just kind of my thinking. Lattice was very much an experiment for me to see if I could go through the whole process, if I could have my beta readers give me enough feedback, get a line editor, and do the work to make it actually a book, and take advantage of the fact that I live in a time where there are no gatekeepers to getting books on shelves. Like, that is extremely exciting, and I feel incredibly blessed to be here now. And so I did it with Lattice, and I feel like I was very lucky to be able to do that. I have since then released my first full-length novel, which is called Onset. It is the first book in a trilogy, and it's a YA, guess what, dark thriller crossover, and it's about kids growing up in a foster system, and they have some potentially unique abilities, and guess what? Whenever kids show adults something beautiful, the adults turn it into something dark, and so that's what Onset is about. And it's my first full-length novel, and so far it's getting some pretty good feedback. I'm really excited about having that out there. So my entire plan is to release, an Onset I wrote for my kids when they were like 9 and 13. So that was 10 years ago, and it's a story for them about them, and and they loved it. So I thought, well, I'll share it more broadly. So that's out. The next Jack's book is going to be out in a couple of months, and it's going to, it stays in the same universe, obviously, but it moves the ethical question forward, I think. If Lattice is about hidden horror becoming visible at systems levels, Rollback is very much about what happens when that horror kind of becomes our infrastructure. And so, and it is another kind of, season of Jack's.
Right.
And I'm very excited about it. So this is the era of releasing old creative works.
Awesome.
Jump in, Paul. The water is very warm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I have some that I think I will put on my website that people can get, like a package of my. I did something similar to what you did maybe 10, 12 years ago, where I took something I'd written when I was like 20 to 21 and reimagined it as a fairly different story, but with a lot of the same scenes and basic characters, and turned it into a novelette. And but then I haven't published anything in the last decade or so for fiction. So reading this and talking to you has definitely increased my appetite for both, digging up older things and also actually writing some of the stories that I have kind of percolating in my mind.
No, I think I'm really glad both of you are doing that. I've loved both of your writings. I'm hoping my book on villains will eventually come out. I've been talking about it for 5 years now. We'll see if it actually does. But yeah, I just want to reiterate, you can find both Paul and Pete's work in the links in the show notes. I know this is definitely true with Paul. If you follow the specific link we have in the show notes, you will not only get the book at a discount, but also a little bit of that money will come back to us running this podcast. Though still a good one will still go to Paul. If Pete and I are able to,
and none will go to Yacht Fuel.
Yes, none.
Bezos, so
I mean, there will be no Bezos box associated with that.
Yacht Fuel.
Pete's version. If we're able to set that up, there'll definitely be a link where Pete gets most of the money. We may do a affiliate thing so that a little bit of the money will come to this podcast because we help promote it. In which case, some part of the money for the podcast
definitely. Definitely click the links in the show notes, because those will be Matthew's, the superhero ethics affiliate links, and give Matthew and Paul the sniff, Please.
which some of it goes back to Pete then. Yeah, so all of it will work well.
It's a win-win-win.
Everyone wins. And you know what? None of it's Bezo bucks. Unless
Yeah.
you really want to get it from Amazon, in which case
In which
we'll get
case.
like 2 cents of Bezo bucks. But however you want to do it, get the show notes. Yeah, get all the links in the show notes. In there also you can find, of course, links to my other podcast, Star Wars Generations podcast, which we are going to be talking about the Ninth Jedi that's coming out soon. We did a whole thing on all of the episodes of the Mall show, which was really exciting. If you go back earlier in this podcast, if you really like private investigators and worlds that are a little different than our own, Spider Noir was a great show and had a great time talking about that with Will Freeland, who's done a lot of work with us on Spider-Man and other Marvel stuff. So please check all those out. Check out the Marvel Movie Minute that Pete and I are on, and Paul has been a guest on a couple times. Check out all the other podcasts on True Story FM, and most importantly, we have spoken.
Have you run out of fuel in deep space? Do you have an expendable crew member? Why not turn them into fuel? For the low price of, I don't know how much these things cost, but I was just trying to write some ad copy.
There you
for,
go.
you know,
There you go. I like it.
some glassing
good.
services.
And we're out.